Welcome back, my oily tacticians. Mythic is the new shit, but I have not seen anyone talk about Mythic Machine of Wars. So I asked myself, what do Mythic Machine of Wars actually do, and which one do I choose to level? So I started looking through the list of Machine of Wars and started thinking about which one to push to Blue Star and finally to Mythic. The most important thing in Tacticus is to have fun. So select whatever Machine of War is most fun to you. There is no strongest, there is only the current meta. But aside from that, the different Machine of Wars are used for different things. So let's see what Machine of War does what and how to use it. For reference, I'm using the Tacticus table tool that was created by Table from the Eye of Terror cluster. A big thank you to Table for creating this tool, and a big thank you to Nandi for sharing it with us. I'm gonna look at all Machine of Wars at Mythic Blue Star with level 50 abilities. So let's start. Just a quick heads up, I'm not gonna read through every ability text. You will see all of them on screen and I'm sure you're old enough to read. But I will still give you some pros and cons for every ability. So let's start with Galation. So starting with his primary. The pros are it's a really beefy summon. It has great synergy with the mech teams and multi-hit combos due to it having a lot of hits on its melee attack and ranged attack. And it's great at blocking movement and locking enemies in place. The cons are you can't use your secondary attack anymore, the summon can't move, and sometimes it's quite difficult to deploy depending on the map. Next up, the secondary. The pros are it's good damage if it's leveled, it has good pierce, and it's free. But the cons are quite big. It's really easy to avoid, to be honest, and you probably just use it once per battle before deploying your big beefy boy. And finally for the Mythic passive. So what does it do? It provides you with a pretty great damage reduction of 10 to 20% for any Mythic character standing next to another Mythic character or standing next to Galation. So now the question is, where is it useful? So Galation is mostly used in the mechanical team, so it's a great way of giving you some more tenacity for your mech teams. So the mech team wants to build clumps of 2 to 3 characters anyway, so it's a great fit and most certainly will give your mech team the needed tankiness to survive the mythic and high level legendary bosses. But don't sleep on this Machine of War in PvP, it can provide with great survivability due to the damage reduction just needing one other friendly character standing next to your character. So oil up the Galation, it's a great mechanical summon, it's beefy, it gives you damage reduction for your whole team for as long as you clump your characters together. So next up, the Exorcist. Starting with his primary, it provides like a 20% damage buff. That's great for ranged attacks and for all attacks for Adeptus Sororitas units, but only against enemies on fire hexes. So the percentage damage buff for ranged attacks is great for high damage units like the Miranthrope or maybe Certus or something. And it also provides some crowd control and a little bit of fire damage. The cons are it's only good for ranged attacks and for the Adeptus Sororitas. It's a percentage damage buff, so it's better on high damage units than on multi-hit units, and you need fire for it to actually do something. Next, the secondary. Pros are obviously it's free, it deals some decent blast damage, it provides you with some Act of Faith stacks, which is the passive ability of all Adeptus Sororitas units. It has nice area damage actually, and it's kind of easy to hit if you know where to place it. And the cons are it's only really useful if you actually play with the Adeptus Sororitas, otherwise it's just nice blast damage. So next up for the Mythic passive. It's another damage reduction passive. because it provides your team with a 25 to 50% max HP shield if they attack enemies on fire hexes or if they crit against enemies. That sounds really great for me. Obviously for the Psyker team with the Neuron Trove, they're gonna survive so much more shit. They will get their shield every round due to your Ahriman setting the hexes on fire or your Exorcist being able to set the hexes where the boss stands on fire. But I want you to think about the option of taking this thing into PvP. Think about any PvP team that gets like a 25 to 50% max HP shield on their units. That sounds kind of crazy for me, and it's every round where you're able to attack enemies on fire hexes. That's pretty crazy, so I think you should totally think about oiling the Exorcist up and pushing him up to Mythic. Let's move on to the Malios rocket launcher. So for the primaries, the pros are it has a huge AoE damage, it suppresses all hit enemies, and it deals more damage if enemies are near Astra Militarum units. The cons are it kind of takes long to use in my opinion, it's kind of RNG what gets hit, and it's not too hard to avoid depending on your team. So for the secondary, the pros are it's free and it can summon multiple Kalian Guardsmen from round 3 onward. The cons are it has a pretty long initial cooldown with 2 rounds and you can't choose where to spawn the Guardsmen. Next up, the Mythic passive. What does it do? Enemies take 10 to 20% more damage from ranged attacks, obviously from Mythic characters, if they are adjacent to a Kalian Guardsman or to another Mythic character. So this Machine of War looks like it's gonna be more for PvP. There is the option of using it as a buffer for a ranged raid team, because it's pretty easy to get the Mythic buff on your characters, and it's pretty easy and reliable to get it on all of your characters. And additionally, it's kind of the only really reliable damage buff for ranged teams on the Mythic side of Machine of War passives. In PvP, this Machine of War is obviously great due to it providing summons, it has AoE damage, and an easily accessible buff to provide your damage units with even more damage. So wrapping this Machine of War up, it's super great for PvP, and it's gonna stay great for PvP, and maybe on Mythic it will even have a use in PvE. Moving on to the Forge Fiend. The pros of the primary is it has great AoE damage. For some reason the damage of the primary is buffable and it creates some fire hexes. The cons are it can only target summoned units and it creates fire hexes, so it will restrict your movement and the enemies. Next, the secondary. Pros are it's free, it deals damage, it has crowd control with the fire hexes you're laying down, and it's also buffable. Kind of strange that the Forge Fiend has buffable damage on his abilities. The cons are it needs fire to be there already to deal any significant damage, otherwise it will just lay down fire, which is great for PvP to block some movement and stuff, but for raid bosses it will just restrict you and will not work too good if there is no fire. Next up, Mythic passive. It's a damage reduction ability and it reduces damage taken of all Mythic characters standing on hexes with hex effects by 10 to 20%. So how and where to use it? This Machine of War is great for PvE. For the melee teams, especially ones with flying units, because there it can provide the best damage without restricting your movement. This Machine of War also likes teams that play around with hex effects, like maybe a Black Legion team or something along those lines. In PvP, this machine is also great. It provides some damage, some crowd control, and now even damage reduction. Count me in. So, wrapping up this machine of war, it's amazingly versatile, giving you access to easy damage, crowd control, and with Mythic, even damage reduction. Helping your fragile characters surviving raid, boss attacks and PvP hits. But you need to be able to spread some kind of hex effect, otherwise this Mythic passive will be totally useless. Let's move on to the Plague Burst Crawler. So the pros for its primary is, I guess it deals damage and it has no cooldown. And the cons are, it needs the enemy to be either debuffed with an armor debuff or be in contagion of Nurgle radius to be even an eligible target. And the pierce ratio and the damage of this ability are both not great. Moving on to the secondary, the pros are it's free, it's adding contamination hexes up to 7 hexes, it can suppress and it deals some damage with really good pierce ratio. The only downside for this ability is it again needs the enemy to have some kind of armor debuff or be in contagion range. So for the Mythic passive, you're getting a damage buff again. It makes it so that your characters deal an additional 10 to 20% damage while on hexes with contamination. So what does this give us? So first up, this machine of war I think is not even in discussion for PvE, and I personally think that's kind of wrong. Yeah, maybe this machine of war deals literally no damage to bosses, but it has other great uses in my eyes. So it looks like it could be a great addition to the mech team, due to the mech team already spreading a lot of contamination themselves, and they don't suffer the armor debuff of the contamination hexes. So you are pretty free in using contaminated hexes to buff your damage up. I think it's kind of neat, to be honest. And you have the added bonus of using the Plague Burst Crawler as an XL fire extinguisher. For example, against the Avatar of Cain. In PvP, this machine of war is even better. It extinguishes fire, it has reliable damage, damage buff, plus contaminated hexes. And remember, all of these just get easier to use and apply if you use Death Guard characters in your team-ups. So, to wrap up the Forgotten Child of Mortarion, it's a ginormous fire extinguisher with semi-reliable damage, contaminated hexes, and a pretty good and reliable damage buff for either Death Guard teams or mechanical teams. It's good in PvP and might be useful in PvE, with some additional testing needing to be done in this direction. So now for the new guy in town, the Rucker Truck. Its primary deals okay damage, it summons a large squig with pretty good stats, it's comparable to the Aberrant Hypermorph from the Genestealer cults, and it allows you to get stuck in ability with other orc units way easier. The cons are you need 2 other orcs or 4 other units adjacent to the target for it to work, and yeah, as you can see, it really needs other orcs to work. For its secondary, it's free, it deals a really good amount of blast damage if the enemy steps on the mines. It kind of restricts movement, it's relatively easy to hit, especially in raids, and it does not restrict or hurt your own units. The big cons are it has pretty big RNG for where the squig bombs are flying, and it's not too hard to avoid in PvP. Now for the Mythic passive. It's a damage buff again. It makes it so that enemies suffer 10 to 20% more damage from normal melee attacks against them if they are adjacent to 2 or more friendly units or 1 large squig. Key here is that the enemies take more damage, not that the units deal more damage. Straight up, this ability looks great for all orcs and all melee focused teams that use normal melee attacks. In PvP, this ability will do great work. Ragnar is still one of the best PvP characters in my eyes, and both Gulgords and Snotflogger are two really great characters for PvP. But I think the place for this ability is in PvE. Even if there are no meta teams at the moment that use multi-hit combinations, the multi-hit teams are still lurking in the background, and I think a lot of you will have at least Ragnar and probably Snotflogger at decently high level. So using a double Warhowl hit stacking combo with orcs, or even using the double Warhowl forecast combo, will do great work with this Machine of War and its mythic passive. The problem is that this Machine of War only affects normal melee attacks, and most high-end raid teams at the moment don't use them. I think with relics and new characters, this thing can probably become meta. To wrap this Machine of War up, it provides you with strong summons and the ability to make 1 target hex and 4 random ones do a big ouchie if someone steps on it. The problem is that it's kind of bad if you don't play it in a team with at least 2 orcs or a lot of other melee characters. But if you're playing orcs, this Machine of War will be great for you. So, jumping into our second to last Machine of War, Soji. So, his primary deals big damage, depending on whether the target has moved much in the last turn. It can deal up to 16k damage per round. It has a great pierce ratio with piercing damage, and it deals bonus damage against large targets and vehicles, and it can disable other Machine of Wars in PvP. The cons is damage is reduced if the enemy is moving, and it only deals damage, nothing else. For the secondary, it puts out some free marker lights, it deals free damage to all enemies with marker lights on them, and it has no cooldown. The cons are it only damages units with marker lights, and it deals not a lot of damage. So for the mythic passive, it's a damage reduction ability again, and it makes it so that enemies deal 10 to 20% less damage to your mythic characters after being attacked by a ranged attack. This does not need to be from a mythic character, or even from a character, or if they have a marker light debuff on them. It looks like it's a relative easy to spread debuff, especially with Tau characters and ranged teams. In PvE this ability will be okay. You can constantly keep this debuff on the boss with nearly every team, either via the secondary ability of Sojin or using ranged attacks. Additionally, the rest of this Machine of Wars kit looks like it's great for some bosses that don't move a lot, or if you need more tenacity for your team but you don't want to bring Galatian or the Forge Field. But I think PvP is where this thing will be the GOAT. It has an easy to apply damage debuff, it has great single target DPS from its primary, at least if you get the enemy to stand still, which is pretty easy if you have some way of taunting the enemy, or if there's just not a lot of space to move around. And you have great poke damage with your marker lights, which is especially great for removing the Terminator armor buff. All in all, I think this Machine of War gets hated too much, and it's actually pretty good, especially on Mythic. But it doesn't have a lot of versatility, unlike the Forge Fiend with its fire hexes, for example. It does damage, and that's what it's great at. It doesn't want to do anything except for damage. So, if you want to pack a bit of more damage into your teams, choose the Tau Machine of War. And last but not least, the Biovore. For its primary, it summons 3 Spore Mines, which are great to lock raid bosses in place and distract enemies. The cons here are the Spore Mines are pretty squishy, and depending on what enemies you're fighting, it's pretty hard to get them to connect or actually do something else than distract the enemies. The other con is the summons only have a movement range of 1 unless you use characters with the Synapse trait, then they actually get the movement of 2. So for the secondary, pros, it gives you a free summon, it's good for manipulating raid boss movement, and it might deal some damage. The cons are, it's hard to have the mine actually deal damage, and obviously the movement of the mine is also a con here. So for the Mythic passive, It's a damage buff again, and it makes it so that enemies that are dealt damage by spore mines take an additional 10 up to 20% damage from all character attacks for the next round. At face value, this ability is one of the best damage buffs there is when it comes to Machine of Wars. The problem is you have to get one of your spore mines to connect to the enemy, otherwise the Mythic ability does nothing for you. And the problem here is most bosses have some form of AoE damage or some form of summons that will make quick work of your spore mines. Or if you decide to use the secondary ability, the boss will probably go and kill your spore mine due to it having pretty weak health stats and being an easy target for the boss to pick off. From my experience, making the mines connect is often pretty hard, and most of the time you're only using this Machine of War to manipulate boss movement or keep bosses in place. So all in all, I think this Machine of War is great. It has great use cases with the spore mines and being able to bait some enemies into attacking the spore mines, but I don't think that Mythic will give you what you want from your Mythic upgrade in the Machine of War. But be free to upgrade it and prove me wrong. So after all these informations, I think you two will need a break. Thanks for watching, subscribe and like the video if you liked it, and I hope you will be there for the next video.